Hello, folks. Thanks for joining us today for the Chatbase live stream. We have quite a treat for you today. We're going to be talking about benchmarks to help you understand how well your bot is doing compared to others. I'm Ofer Ronen. I'm the general manager of Chatbase, which provides bot analytics and optimization. So let's jump into it. We're going to start today by talking about engagement benchmarks, and we're going to spend a lot of time on engagement. It turns out it takes more than one metric to figure out the level of engagement in your bot. So we're going to talk about that across different industries and across different use cases. And then we'll also talk about retention. So it's not enough to have engaging experiences, but you want people to come back to your bot. So we're going to do an analysis of retention as well. And then we'll finish up with a bonus benchmark that I think folks will really enjoy hearing about. So that's a little surprise at the end of the live stream today. And then we're going to have questions. So make sure to get in your questions now so they can get upvoted. The sooner you ask your question, the better chance that you'll get an answer today. Okay, so let's start with engagement benchmarks. Actually, just to mention, to ask your questions, you can use the short link at the top. Just type it in and then ask your question. So engagement benchmarks. What we did was we surveyed our users, the users of our bot analytics, and we have 484 bots that have over 100 sessions that we're going to look at for this analysis. Now, before we start, I want to talk about how do you measure engagement in a bot. So if you have a certain bot session length, it's not enough to know how long the session is. You want to know how many interactions there are along the way, because you could have another session that's exactly the same length, but less interactions along the way. And so it's a different type of engagement, and you should be aware. Neither one is better or worse. The nature of bots, especially the text version of bots or chat bots, is that it could be asynchronous, meaning someone could type something and then minutes later type another message. Or with voice bots, they're more likely to be synchronous, where it's the session is an ongoing thing and a continuous conversation. It's good to be aware of the level of engagement, these different levels of engagement. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about use cases, but really what we mean is, how does your bot make money? Those are like the kind of use cases we'll look at, and here are the 5 use cases that we've surveyed our customers, that we've categorized our customers into. And so there's lead generation, ads revenue, subscription, customer support, or e-commerce. So one of those 5. And what we found, as you can see here, is that lead gen, which was surprising to me, was the most engaging in terms of session time. So almost 2 minutes of session time was the median time for lead gen. Now, ads was also pretty high up there, and that's a good thing, because ads kind of bots make more money. There's a direct correlation between length of session and the amount of money they can make, because they can show more ads, and so you want those to be long, and they're up there, with over a minute in terms of session time. On the right side, you can see that e-commerce and customer support bots had very short sessions. Now, for customer support, actually, it's not necessarily a bad thing. You want quick interactions that resolve the issue a customer had, so that maybe is a good thing. For e-commerce, that's probably not a good story there. They have their work cut out. An 18-second session is probably not resulting in a purchase. So something to, for those kind of bots to work on. Now let's layer in the number of turns. So as we said, you want to know the length of time and then how many turns of the conversation along the way, where a turn is the bot speaking and the user speaking. That's one turn. So you can see that there's a direct correlation between session time and number of turns. So both lead gen and ads bots had 3 turns. That's the median number, during the minute to 2 minutes of session time. And and the customer support ones only had 1 turn. Now that's maybe problematic. I would imagine that 1 turn of the conversation often is not enough to resolve the customer issue. But if it actually can be done in 1 turn, actually that's ideal. But yeah, that's interesting to see that the median for both e-commerce and customer support is 1 turn, which most likely is not a meaningful experience for those users. Okay, so that's like the median kind of experience. And now I thought it would be interesting to look at the high end. So the longest sessions, the most engaged users, what do those look like for these 5 use cases? So let's take a look. Well, it looks like on the high end, so the top 10% of engaged users in terms of session time spent almost 12 minutes. And again, lead gen was the most engaging in terms of time. So it was almost 12 minutes. Now what's surprising is that subscription revenue moved up to the 2nd position and also is like over 11 minutes. So that's great. Ads revenue, unfortunately, is all the way on the right. And again, you'd hope to have the most engaged users spending a lot of time in your ads kind of bot, but they spent just 8 minutes, and relatively speaking, that's less than the peers. And so that's maybe not ideal. But then if you look at number of turns of the conversation, you see that ads had 15 turns. And so even though the session time is shorter for ads, kind of bots that monetize with ads, there were rapid fire kind of turns, and within 8 minutes, lots of turns of the conversation, 15 of them. And then the subscription revenue, which was in the 2nd position, moved to 3rd position, meaning that it had less turns, so more delay between turns, even though the session time was higher. Finally, on the customer support side, you can see on the high end that you get like 5 turns of the conversation. That's probably, if I was to guess, that's like a reasonable number of turns that it takes for most bots to resolve a support issue. But if they can do it in 1, that's even better. So I think the takeaway is that lead gen is currently the most engaging when it comes to bots, with 16 turns and almost 12 minutes for the top kind of interactions. And so my hope is, looking at this data, you can consider your own bot use case and see where you land relative to your peers. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and now talk about industries. So there's all kinds of bot industries out there. They map well to industries that are used in the app world. And let's take a look at engagement across industries. Okay, so you can see here a lot of different industries, and we group them into high, medium, low in terms of session time, median session time. And then you can see on the high end, bots that are in the health space really do well, with over 2 minutes of median session time. And then sports and business services as well do well. On the low end, there's bots that are in the finance space, productivity. Somehow they are not as engaging in terms of session time. Now again, let's layer in the number of turns of the conversation to see what patterns emerge. So for example, let's see for health and fitness, how many turns of the conversation are there during the 2 minutes plus? And so you can see that for health and fitness, there's 3 turns of the conversation. That's the median number over the 2 minutes. And so I imagine that maybe if it's a fitness one, you might be, processing and trying out a workout and then coming back to the bot. It's a more asynchronous experience, so it's more stretched out, these turns. It's interesting to see shopping at the top with 4 turns of the conversation. If I go back for a second and look at where shopping was in terms of session time, you can see that it was in the middle bucket, in the medium. So even though it's less than a minute of session time, there's a lot that happens over the minute, 4 turns of the conversation. So feel free to look where you fall in terms of your bot across these industries and see how you might compare. And again, now we're going to take a look at the most engaging users, most engaged users, the top 10% per industry. So when we look at that, it's pretty interesting to see that educational bots, ones that teach you something, are really like by far the most engaging in terms of session time, with close to 30 minutes of engagement. So that is something to consider. I think every industry or every type of company can consider an education bot. There's often opportunities for that. So what's also interesting is that there are no bots that had low kind of session time, and the definition is under 5 minutes. Medium is over 10, up to 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. So on the high end, across industries, the bots did well when it comes to session time. Now, if we layer in number of turns, again, to get a clearer picture of engagement, you can see that there are some bots that had a low number of engagement when it comes to turns. And low is like 5 or less turns. There's bots in the travel and local space and business services space that maybe could do better in terms of increasing the number of turns of the conversation. When you look at turns, lifestyle really stands out with over 30 turns of the conversation. If we go back and look at the session time for lifestyle, you can see that lifestyle is actually I'll revise this after this and add lifestyle back in. I see that I missed it here, but I'll correct that after this session. But anyways, lifestyle really did well. Okay, we're gonna now switch to talking about retention. So let's talk about retention benchmarks. We've looked at over 1,000 bots that had over 100 users, and when you talk about retention, what comes to my mind is Josh Ellman, who is a partner at Greylock. He also recently took a job as VP of product at Robinhood, which is a multi-billion-dollar valued startup. And he's been a PM at Facebook and Twitter in the early days and helped them grow. Now, what Josh Ellman has shared with me in the past is that when picking startups to invest in, he, especially for consumer kind of apps, he looks at 7-day retention. Like, did people come back after a week? Did they come back to use the app? Now, I think we can use the same kind of benchmark when it comes to bots. Are people coming back and using them after a week? Okay, so if we look at it from that lens, we can see that in terms of use cases, the subscription bots really do well at a little bit over 15% of retention after a week. So 7 days later, 15% of people come back. Now, it makes some sense. If someone signed up for a subscription, they're likely getting notifications to come back and are returning regularly. You can see that all the other use cases were at 5% or lower in terms of engagement after a week. And so it feels like they could move up maybe by using more notifications. That's one way to consider, or providing more engaging experiences. But right now they're on the lower end of the spectrum. Now, if we do the same analysis by industry, you can see that that on the high end, photography bots really shine, and have over actually almost 30% retention after a week. So they're doing something right. Similarly, productivity apps and health and fitness app really seem to keep their users better than their peers. On the low end, if you look all the way on the right, there's something surprising there, that social has such low 1 week retention. In the app world, social bots often had the highest 1 week retention, hovering around 60%. And so for them to be like at a sub 5% rate is surprising, and feels like there's something there to improve. Other than that, having shopping on that low end of the bucket also is it's not ideal, but then again, maybe people don't shop that often, like meaning they visit a specific e-commerce bot more periodically. The use case is not as common. So unlike socials, shopping maybe should be in that bucket. Okay, so now we're going to talk about this bonus benchmark that I mentioned that I think folks will enjoy seeing. So we did an analysis by platform. So for different platforms that your bots live on, what is the median session time? And on the high end is Facebook Messenger with over 2 minutes of median session time. Now on the low end is Alexa with pretty much single interactions. There's no, it's a very short session time, query response kind of, or request response kind of interaction as the median. Now it's not surprising. Voice bots tend to be more often single interaction, like play the song or turn on the lights, and so that's somewhat expected. And then if you look at actions on Google, it's in the medium bucket. That also makes sense because actions can be voice or they can be text based or chat based. And so having it in the middle actually makes some sense because it's an average of both types of actions. So that's where I would expect it to land. So really the story for me that comes out from this slide is the platforms are strictly text-based, are more towards the left, and tend to have longer sessions, more involved interactions, often with buttons that encourage more engagement. And ones towards the right can include more voice interactions. Also, SMS often is just meant as a notification medium and is not, there's no deep experiences there. And so that's also not surprising to have it in the low bucket. Okay, so that's the end of the slides. And now we're going to switch over to Q&A. So let me take a look and see what questions have come in. Okay, so Anonymous asks, can you define lead generation? What types of experiences are lumped in here? Would an experience from an entertainment company like Netflix or Disney be included? Okay, so lead generation are are these experiences where you're trying to get someone interested in your service and you're collecting information so that later you can make them a paying customer. And so during the lead generation experience, there's no payment made. It's more information collected. And it can be over a few turns of the conversation where you collect their name and email and those kind of things. And then later you reach out and try to have them pay for the service. So yes, it can include Netflix or Disney if that's the use case to gather, like especially with Netflix, yeah, they might gather interest and then later try to close you as a customer. Okay, let's look at more questions. Okay. So the question from Anonymous is, for an info bot or informational bot, do you recommend to end the conversation after the first request is answered? Of course, that gives the user another turn to ask, or giving the user another turn to ask will increase engagement, but it also increases abort rate. Okay, so I think the answer is it depends. It's every informational kind of bot differs. If it's a customer support bot where you're trying to learn about a product, or a lead gen bot, really you want to give answers to whatever questions there are. If you can answer a question in one turn, I think that is ideal. But if your question then leads to other questions, that's fine, as long as you can handle those other questions. So I really think it's about satisfying the customer's need for information, and it can take one to many turns. Okay, so let's see if there's any other questions. So the question from Anonymous is, how do you define session time, and how does it impact the metrics? So session time is defined as from the initial interaction in a session until there's 15 minutes of inactivity. And so when there's 15 minutes of inactivity, we call it, and the session ended 15 minutes earlier, the last interaction. Now, how does it impact the metrics? So I'm not sure what the question is really about, but I think with session time, there's no right amount. It depends on your use case. If it's customer support, you want shorter session times that answer questions. If it's entertainment, you want long session times. There's a direct correlation between the length of the session time number of ads, let's say, that you can show. And so in that case, you want long session times. So for your use case, see what's appropriate. Okay, now we're going back to the questions. And we might do one last question. Okay, let's see. So here's the question from Anonymous. There are certain industries that are missing from the analysis. Why is that? So we only included industries where we had statistically significant data. If we didn't have enough bots for a given industry, we left it off the analysis. And so that's why. Okay, and with that, I want to thank everyone that joined the live stream today. We're excited to bring you more metrics over time as we collect them. So you can look to our Chatbase blog for those kind of metrics in the future. Have a good day.